All right, chapter 38.2, the footnotes. 1. The story of Zeus and the boy's guts is not so much a myth as a moral antecedent expressing the disgust felt in the more civilized parts of Greece for the ancient cannibalistic practices of Arcadia, which were still performed in the name of Zeus as barbarous and unnatural. Lysion's virtuous Athenian contemporary Cecrops offered only barley cakes, abstaining even from animal sacrifices. The Lycaean rites, which the author denies that Zeus ever countenanced, were apparently intended to discourage the wolves from preying on flocks and herds by sending them a human king. Lysias means of the she-wolf, but also of the light. And the lightning in the Lycian myth shows the Arcadian Zeus began as a rain-making sacred king in service to the divine she-wolf, the moon, to whom the wolf pack howls. 2. A great year of 100 months, or 8 solar years, was divided equally between the sacred king and his Tanist, and Lysion's 50 sons, one for every month of the sacred king's reign, will have been the eaters of the humble soup. The figure, 22, unless it has been arrived at by account of the families who claim descent from Lycion and had to participate in the humble feast, probably refers to the 22 5-year lustra which composed the cycle, the 110 years cycle constituting the reign of a particular line of priestesses. 3. The myth of the Deucalion's flood, apparently brought from Asia by the Heliads, has the same origin as the biblical legend of Noah, but though Noah's invention of wine is the subject of a Hebrew moral tale, incidentally justifying the enslavement of the Canaanites by their Kassite and Semitic conquerors. Deucalion's claim to the invention has been suppressed by the Greeks in favor of Dionysius. Deucalion is, however, described as the brother of Ariadne, who was the mother, by Dionysius, of various vine cult tribes, and has kept his name, New Wine Sailor, from Dicus and Helios. Okay. The Deucalion myth records a Mesopotamian flood of the 3rd millennium BC, but also the autumnal New Year's feast of Babylonia, Syria, and Palestine. This feast celebrated Parnapishtim's outpouring of sweet new wine to the builders of the ark, in which, according to the Babylonian Gilgamesh epic, he and his family survived the deluge sent by the goddess Ishtar. The ark was a moon ship, and the feast was celebrated on the new moon nearest to the autumnal equinox as a mean of inducing the winter rains. Ishtar in the Greek myth is called Pyrrha, the name of the goddess mother of the Piraeusati Philistines, a Cretan people who came to Palestine by way of Cilicia about the year 1200 BC. In Greek, Pyrrha means fiery red and is an adjective applied to wine. 4. Xusthros was the hero of the Sumerian flood legend recorded by Beros, and his ark came to rest on Mount Ararat. All these arks were built of acacia wood, a timber also used by Isis for building Osiris's death barge. 5. The myth of an angry god who decides to punish man's wickedness with a deluge seems to be a late Greek borrowing from the Phoenicians or the Jews, but the number of different mountains in Greece, Thrace, and Sicily on which Deucalion is said to have landed suggests that an ancient flood myth had been superimposed on a latter legend of a flood in northern Greece. In the earliest Greek version of the myth, Themis renews the race of man without first obtaining Zeus's consent. It is, therefore, likely that she, not he, was credited with the flood, as in Babylonia. 6. The transformation of stones into a people is perhaps another Hellenic borrowing from the East. St. John the Baptist referred to a similar legend in a pun of the Hebrew words Banim and Anim, declaring that God could raise up children to Abraham from the desert stones. 7. That a white bitch, the moon goddess Hecate, littered a vine stalk in the reign of Deucalion's son Orestes is probably the earliest Greek wine myth. The name Ozalian Ozolian is said to be derived from ozoi, vine shoots. One of the wicked sons of Lycaon was also named Orestius, which may account for the forced connection which the mythographers have made between the myth of the Umble Soup and the Deucalion flood. 8. Amphictyon, the name of another of Deucalion's sons, is a male form of Amphictyonis, the goddess whose name the famous Northern Confederation, the Amphiktyionic League, had been founded. According to Strabo, Callimachus, and the Scholiast of Euripides, Orestes was regularized by Archelaus of Argos. Civilized Greeks, unlike the dissolute Thracians, abstained from neat wine and its tempering with water at the conference of the member states, which took place in the vintage season at Anthela near Thermopylae. Thermopylae will have been a precaution against murderous disputes. 9. Deucalion's son, Hellen, was the eponymous ancestor of the entire Hellenic race. His name shows that he was a royal deputy for the priestess of Helle, or Helen, or Selene, the moon, and according to Pausanias, the first tribe to be called Hellenes came from Thessaly, where Helle was worshipped. 10. Aristotle says that Deucalion's flood took place in ancient Greece, namely the district about Dodona and the Archelaus River. Gracie means worshippers of the crone, presumably the earth goddess of Dodona, who appeared in a triad as the gray. And it has been suggested that the Arcanes were forced to invade the Peloponnese because usually heavy rains had swamped their grazing grounds. Helle's worship seems to have ousted that of the Grey. 11. The Scarabaeus beetle was an emblem of immortality in Lower Egypt because it survived the flooding of the Nile. The pharaoh, as Osiris, entered his sunboat in the form of a scarabus, and its sacral use spread to Palestine, the Aegean, Etruria, and the Baltic Islands. Antonius Liberalis also mentions the myth of Cerambus or Tarambus, quoting Nicander.